Apocalypse. This is Jared the Apocalypse, Nerd Wallace for Podcast at Ground Zero with Adam Scott Glancy for episode number 18, The Day After versus Threads. So we're going to be talking about both of these classic 1980s scare tactic nuclear war made-for-TV shows.
Scare tactic? You mean like, are you suggesting that these dirty hippies made nuclear war not look as fun as it clearly was going to be?
Oh, well, it's still clearly going to be fun, but they're trying to poo-poo on our parade, apparently.
Yeah, because we all know post-nuclear war was all going to be mohawks and crossbows and, fast cars. It wasn't going to be this vomiting until the lining of your stomach inverts out of your mouth like a giant slimy party balloon.
Well, that was maybe in the beginning, but afterwards it gets fun, so...
Okay. Yes, these guys don't make it look fun. They really don't.
No, come on. I mean, everybody knows that there's going to be, like you said, fast cars, buttless chaps, football, shoulder pads, and mohawks everywhere. So
and fleshy-headed mutants. Let's not forget the fleshy-headed mutants. I mean, although I guess technically Threads gave us a fleshy-headed mutant, but let's proceed, shall we?
Yes. So, folks, we're going to talk about these two classic films here. The Day After being the American film, and Threads being the UK film.
It's worth doing The Day After first because technically it comes out first.
It did come out first. It originally aired November 20th, 1983 on ABC television. Apparently, 1 million people watched it 100 million people watched it during its initial broadcast.
In the bad old days before everyone had a VCR or a
cable or something better to watch, like YouTube. So,
dude, it was a television event.
It was.
Remember when they used to give us television events?
Vaguely, but
well, based on the gray in your beard, I bet you remember.
Yeah, right. So, hey, I've had this gray for years. So we're gonna talk about The Day After, which came first, 1983, and then. Threads came out afterwards. Threads aired originally in the UK September 23rd, 1984 on BBC Two, and then again it first aired in America in January 13th, 1985. So I'm not sure if The Day After inspired Threads, but I think actually there's a documentary out there. It was called oh fuck, I just lost it. I had it. It was called
on the eighth day.
No.
Oh.
A Guide to Armageddon. It was part of the QED program in England. It originally aired in July 26, 1982, and it was written and directed by Mike Jackson, who, perchance, was the director and producer for Threads, and that originally came out in 1982. But from watching A Guide to Armageddon, which I was turned on to from Bill from postapocalyptic.com, because we've been talking about on the 8th day, and we'll talk about that later, he had turned around and said, hey, A Guide to Armageddon was actually done by the same guy, and it is. So I watched it. It's about a 30-minute documentary on the effects of one megaton warhead detonated over an English city and the effects and what would happen. I have that actually favorited on our YouTube channel. So if you go to the favorites of Podcast at Ground Zero, it's on there, so you can watch that. Basically, it seems like Threads is a much bigger and more detailed expansion of that, except instead of focusing on the one detonation event, it still talks about the same kind of things, but we'll get more into Threads later. But we'll talk about The Day After first. It was just an interesting little fact that same guy did that pre and post The Day After. So,
well, let me take a moment to throw Nicholas Meyer out here. The guy who did The Day After, who directed it, is the guy who brought us Time After Time with Malcolm McDowell.
Wow.
And David Warner as Jack the Ripper. He directed Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, the best Star Trek movie.
You mean there was others besides that one?
Well, he also directed Star Trek IV, The Undiscovered Country, which is okay, but is essentially a Star Trek remake of the Gene Hackman movie The Package, which is a Cold War thriller, and it's just Star Trek plastered over a Cold War script. But he also did that. He also did. You remember a movie with Tom Hanks called Volunteers?
Yes.
Comedy. Tim Thomerson with John Candy was in it. I actually quite liked Volunteers back in the day, and the other one he did that's
They're
worth
like they're like missionaries or something, or they're
Peace
volunteers
Corps.
in Peace Corps in like Africa, and they're like helping the villagers out or something,
Well,
right?
they're in Southeast Asia in the '60s, and so half of it is
Same difference.
the CIA and the communists are all fighting over this little village, and anyways, it's a comedy, of course. But the other one I want to throw out is he did a movie called The Deceivers, which is Pierce Brosnan in a movie about the Thuggee cult in India, set in like the 1830s, and it's really good. So Nicholas Myers has not, he's got some duds out there, but out of his director credits, and he's only got 10, most of them are pretty good. Most of them are pretty good. Time After Time, Star Trek, Day After, Volunteers, Deceivers, Star Trek 6.
So he's got a pretty decent pedigree.
Yeah, and I don't think this is quite his strongest piece of work, but all right. But let's move on.
No, not quite. Okay, so I just recently, again, not that I haven't seen this a couple of times, but I haven't watched The Day After in quite a long time, so I needed to rewatch it. And Threads I've seen several times. I rewatched them both, and I know you rewatched them both just to kind of refresh our memory. And there were things that Threads I totally forgot about, which are awesome. But we'll get to that.
We'll get to that because sadly, folks, are the Americans watching this, the Brits kick our ass. All right. Yeah. The American show is what, 2 hours and 10 minutes worth of.
Yeah, 2 hours and 7 minutes. But
okay. But the Brits deliver a concentrated apocalypse that is so much more horrible.
Yeah. Well, The Day After, I remember first watching it and then watching Threads back in, again, 1984.
Now, you saw it when it was first on television, right? I mean, I watched it when it was first on television.
Both of them, yeah. Oh, yeah, totally. And I remember thinking, The Day After was, oh, what a horrible piece of crap. It totally didn't, depict things correctly. Watching it again 20-something years later, it's still not very good, but it's not as bad as I remember. It's not as bad as I remember. I will give it that. Okay, let me get this out there. Folks, spoiler alerts for this entire episode, okay?
Yes. Yeah.
Because, again, the movies are 83, 93, 03, okay? 30 years old. If you haven't seen it yet, I'm sorry. We're going to talk about it a lot, okay?
Yeah.
We'll try not. We'll not get every little minutia, but there will be spoilers, okay?
You'll be hearing about our favorite moments.
Yes. Now, The Day After, the thing that got me, which I forgot about, was the whole beginning sequence of patriotic music and images of America. It was so
farmland, all the camera rolling over all that farmland.
Oh my God!
Small town America, and this sort of this sort of swelling, music. Oh my God! It's like Dvorak's New World Symphony or Fanfare for the Common Man or something.
Yeah, it's so like, America's great, America, and they do this a lot throughout the film. They keep on, they would show these images of like these statues remembering our war veterans and all over this movie, and it's just like, it gets a little bit like, seriously guys, okay, yeah, we get it, America's great, okay, but
or more importantly, this is what we're going to piss away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the movie takes place. It's very specifically takes place in Kansas City, because that's where a large string of Minuteman missile silos are all up and down the states there. So this is where they really focus the film of the events that take place, basically outside of Kansas City and the suburbs.
Do you remember when the camera's going over the beautiful American farmland, showing the threshers harvesting wheat as they're going over the farms? All of a sudden, you start seeing missile silo hatches.
Yep, poked in here and there.
Yeah,
yep.
It's like, oh, there's more going on here than amber waves of grain.
Well, I mean, I guess you. Well, the nuclear missile silos are not the harvest that you want to,
Yeah, reap.
yeah.
Perhaps that's not the harvest you want to reap. But it's interesting that they're showing that stuff at the very beginning, so that there's this idyllic America right next to, these giant holes in the ground in which live monsters.
Yeah.
And certainly that was my impression when you and I went to that missile silo
Oh yeah.
in Washington. It was like going to the cave of Smog, you know,
Oh
while
yeah.
he's well after he's left and moved on to better things, and you're just like, oh yeah, something really evil squatted in this giant cave.
And
Holy shit!
we'll talk about that one of these days, folks. We took a trip out to a decommissioned Titan I missile silo out in Odessa, Washington. So
Yeah.
we'll talk about our trip there one of these days. Not the nice snazzy Titan missile museum in Arizona. We're talking
No,
about a decommissioned, flooded at parts, rusty, climbing around it for hours, decommissioned for 50
yeah,
years missile silo.
you and I, our fat asses were climbing up and down on rickety ladders that were
Mm.
leaned up against shit. I mean, just construction ladders and
Oh
stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
some of it was kind of scary. I was like, I don't really want to do this,
Oh
but
yeah. Moving on though.
moving
Moving
on.
on.
So it's very centric to Kansas City is the focal point of the story and the focal point of the destination, and they talk about
And Lawrence,
and
Kansas.
Lawrence. Well, yeah, that's where the outskirts everybody tends to go. So yeah, they start off building up the characters. Like, okay, here are your main characters. Here's your main families. Like any other story, they're gonna give you all the players.
And one of the problems with watching it now is that even though some of the actors back then weren't really well known, oh my God, they're well known now. I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
you got John Lithgow and
John Lithgow.
Jason Robards is probably the biggest name guy, but Lithgow wasn't really well known, I guess, at the time.
Not yet,
Uh,
but
and
Steve Guttenberg.
Steve Gutenberg wasn't really his career hadn't gone yet. And
It's gone again now. So
and what's his name? Stephen First, fucking Flounder.
yes, Flounder is all over that film.
Yeah, yeah.
And again, he's a college student, so he has such range apparently.
Well, give the man a break. He doesn't get his big breakout role in Babylon 5 until the 2000s, all right, or 90s or whatever it was.
But,
So, anyways, Stephen First is in it. You're going to recognize lots of people who went on to do other stuff, but their names are escaping me at the moment. I'm sure we could all whip open IMDb and figure out who played Hollis, the bartender in Northern Exposure, who played the father of the One Farm family.
yes, you're right. Okay, that's where I recognize him from.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But anyways, so you see a lot of different families. You don't get any kind of a bird's eye view of like what's happening in the White House.
Or the world. Nope. Very
Yeah.
little. You get a sense that okay, something's going on because they've launched one of the Air Force Ones, the SAC Air Command plane that circles.
Looking Glass.
Looking Glass. Looking Glass is launched. The general's on. They're like, okay, this is what we got going on. Blah 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 blah. So apparently, there's already some tensions going on somewhere else. They don't really give you any backstory to it. It's just kind of like shit's already tense.
Yeah.
It's where people are listening to sporadically here and there, and as the story progresses, it starts building up more and more. Like more people starting to hear things, more things on radio. I think I just got confused. It's like basically it was a NATO the Warsaw Pact going into Germany, right?
That's the thing that I thought was really interesting about the film is that in the middle of it they said, and I want to talk about the other two causes of war and some of our other films we're going to talk about, but the cause of war is a Berlin crisis. It's some sort of Warsaw Pact tensions around the city of Berlin. And
three divisions of Soviet tanks are like lined up along the Rhine,
Yeah, and suddenly it's an East-West conflict right in the Fulda Gap. And I remember somebody in the film saying, "Germany? We're not going to go to war over Germany. What's in Germany that we give a shit about? no, if we're gonna have a war, it's gonna be in the Middle East. It's gonna be Saudi Arabia. It's gonna be oil.
Oil, yeah, yeah. That was one of the girl students. She was like, "Oh yeah, no, I'm not worried about it." It's like now if it was oil, yeah, we'd totally go for it. But the problem is, West Germany is part of NATO, so it was a NATO pact issue. So once they invaded there, NATO got involved. We're part of NATO. We got involved. You
Yeah.
know.
But I like the idea that people were blowing off the traditional, the idea that like, oh, whatever, Europe, that's not our strategic interests anymore. What we're worried about is whether the gas gets above $1 a gallon.
Oh my God.
It will be the end of the world if gas prices get to be $2 or $3. We can't let that happen.
Yeah, I remember paying $1.01 a gallon for super unleaded for my old Chevelle muscle car back in like 1988. But
Oh yeah, the movie, the shitty movie Spaceballs made a joke about the spaceship being out of gas, and John Candy says, "I told you not to put more than $5 in the tank." Well, that joke shows its goddamn age because
oh my God, yeah, no,
$5 won't get you anything in your tank.
it'll get you to the next gas station. That's about
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
So anyway, it's the war was a NATO Warsaw Pact issue, which started the whole conflict. Now, you have a sampling of characters. You have the farm family with the daughter getting married. You have the doctor who works in the hospital at the university who has a daughter leaving, and then he had some other various characters like John Lithgow's character is like some professor. He's a professor at the university, and people, and he apparently he's the guy who knows everything.
Isn't he the guy who gets the last word in the movie? Because the radio broadcast at the end over the credits.
Maybe, yeah, I think so.
Because there's this staticky, and you hear somebody go, "Hello, can anyone hear us? Hello."
Yes.
This is Lawrence.
Yeah. So throughout the entire film, it was kind of like nuclear war for dummies, because through the entire film, they kept on putting out, radiation. You can't see radiation, but it's going through you. Like they kept on they over-explained an X-ray.
Yeah.
They over-explained radiation and fallout and the conflict and the missiles. They totally spoon-fed you everything.
Well, what's funny to me is that they did that for a couple of reasons. One, the people who made it were interested in making it into a PSA.
Yeah.
And number two, I'm going to make this joke at the expense of some of the fans of Ronnie Reagan. I get the feeling that the director wanted to simplify it down to a level that even Ronald Reagan would understand.
Yeah. And that's what they tried to do. So everything was kind of spoon-fed. All the, like EMP. Well, what's EMP? Well, EMP is an electromagnetic pulse. If they detonate a warhead, everything was like textbook. Like they were just reading out of a government
manual.
A government manual, like from the civil defense or something. Again, like a PSA. So
and they did it all with a lot. They threw a lot of Basil exposition at us to explain things. But one of the things I wanted to point out on that is that the British film we're going to talk about later has a narrator.
Has an narrator because it has more of a documentary because they keep interjecting. Excuse me. More of a documentary feel. Sorry, folks. I'm burping up mutants, but I don't know.
Don't do that. Please don't do that.
So whereas the British film Threads plays out more like a documentary and a very dry TV story, whereas the Day After plays off like a PSA and a just like a regular American television show. Like, hey, this is all in the nuclear family or whatever.
Yeah, is this the episode where there's a misunderstanding?
I think so. It was. There was a misunderstanding between the U.S. and Russia.
Yeah, I think that was the misunderstanding. You got your NATO in my Warsaw Pact. Oh, you got your Warsaw Pact in my NATO.
So I mean, everything was building over time, and they kept on showing different sects of people who didn't give a shit, students. They even showed guys who were repair technicians in the silos, like just kind of what they're doing on their day-to-day alert status. It all happened pretty quick. It all happened within a couple of days, in the story. It was very fast.
Yeah.
Very fast, like 2 days or something.
There's almost, and during the day after, I want to emphasize this compared to Threads, during the day after there is no government attempt to prepare the population for what's coming.
Nope.
There's no radio broadcast saying
Nope.
what to do in the event. There's no TV shows. There's no public service announcements. There's no organization. There's no attempts to, and again, we'll say in light of the British stuff, there's no attempts to evacuate populations away from silos. The Americans are just going, doodly-doo-doo-doo, it's an away game. This war is over there, just like all the other wars we've had since 1918, where it's never going to be over here. La la la, I'm going to go shopping, and then.
Well, no, I think there was one message that they sent out, and we all know this message very well. Good luck. You're on your own.
Yeah. The announcement that there might be a problem is when everyone looks up and sees the fucking missiles arcing up. It's like, that's the first time the Americans get a clue that,
something's happening. Yeah, I know. You see the streaks in the sky, and it's like, oh, they're just testing, right?
What do you
but that's when, like, the air raid sirens go off, and that's when the broadcast happen. It's like, fuckers, it's a little too late, okay? Everybody's dead now, okay?
The Americans get no wind-up from their government. They get no intervention to say...
Well, yes and no.
All right.
It was okay, but were they also trying to send a message about Americans, okay, and America, because there was news broadcasts about what was going on the radios, and they were talking about it a lot, and we didn't get to hear everything. But were they saying that, oh, we are so, like, it's never going to happen to us, that people weren't really paying attention, that we're better, it can never happen to us? Were they trying to convey that kind of message, maybe, also?
They may have as well. I mean, certainly the film, compared to Threads and the War Game, which I'd like to talk a little tiny bit about.
Yeah.
There's no attempt to prepare the population at all by the government. And part of the message in Threads and the War Game, I believe, was they show these massive government efforts in the last 3 days before the strike, maybe 3 to 4 days, to try and get the population ready, evacuate the population from targeted areas. That even though they do all those things, it doesn't seem to help.
Oh yeah,
it seems to be absolutely worthless. So that was their indictment of civil defense in those films, was it's not going to do any good, no matter if you do everything on the checklist that the government handed you.
Yeah,
it's still going to fail. The American in Threads, it's like, did we have civil defense? I can't remember. Maybe we should get under our desks. I mean, they have no clue what to do. They have
you mean the day after?
Yeah, and the day after, there's just no, they don't know what to do, and so there's panic and such, but there's no indictment of the civil defense system except to suggest that since Americans don't know anything about it, it doesn't matter if there's a civil defense system.
Yeah.
Because they take no steps, based on it.
To defend the civils, so they definitely don't do anything like that. So it moves along, the missiles launch, and like the only thing that somebody really said is like, well, the missiles launch, so either it's like, well, we got the missiles off, so either we don't know and we'll never know. They say it's like either we're striking first or we got enough warning and we got them off before they hit us. So. Yeah. It's coming, and there's a point where SAC Air, the Looking Glass SAC Command says, yeah, they're checking, to see, is this a test? No, it's not a test. It's not a test. A drill, and they're like, no, we have 300 inbound ICBMs.
It's not a number. That's too many zeros. I'm just gonna go out.
300. Oh, they have a lot more than that, but I guess they had to spread the love, but. So this starts to happen, so again, the focal point is Kansas City.
All the military footage is actually taken from military training films.
Yeah, a lot of stock footage.
Yeah, which I actually quite like. It's one of the few times I'm like, okay, if you're going to show me some stock footage, oh shit, here are these guys in the chair force, doing their drills, unlocking the code books, putting the key in the safe. was
exactly.
good.
So they hit Kansas City once, twice. Well, first there's the EMP, and then they hit it once, hit it twice, and eventually, you get people saying it's like, "Well, I saw two over Kansas City, I saw one south of here, and I saw a whole lot of them downrange down south." And somebody speculates, "Oh, they must have hit every missile silo from here down to,
Yeah.
Missouri or whatever it is." So basically, a lot of the missiles were just, were just hitting all the silos down the road.
And certainly, one of the things that we want to point out is that certainly suggests that the Sovs shot first because they're attempting to hit missile silos before they
Yeah,
launch. If we shot first, why the fuck would they bother targeting our missile silos? Because they're already empty.
yeah, they're gone.
Yeah, I suppose they can be reloaded, but you really think there's going to be the national wherewithal to make that happen?
It takes a long time to reload
No.
a missile silo.
So one thing I wanted to point out is the bombs start going off. This film had a pretty good budget, so when they have the EMP go off and everybody's stuck in their car out on the highway, they actually could show you scenes of traffic just going off over the hill.
Yeah.
And the bomb explosions were done by dropping liquid into tanks. They used like an oil water colored mix to drop in and do the mushroom cloud. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where they drop this thing and it would this giant heavy weight of I guess water would go down through the oil and create sort of a mushroom cloud. So the effects are relatively good, but I want to point out something about the bomb blowing shit up. Because again, compared to Threads, there's that one moment when the bomb goes off and everybody gets this zap effect. Like,
Yeah.
Like they glow and you can see their skeletons for a second. All I could think of was the skeleton ray from George Powell's War of the Worlds, the 1951.
Yeah.
And so, everyone gets that zap thing, and I was like, oh, they're zapped, and there's no zappy effect in Threads. When we get to that.
Yeah. Well, they're trying to show everybody. They're trying to show everybody's getting disintegrated. Well, let me backtrack also a little bit about the EMP. They did the EMP, all the cars died, and the thing is, it shows people are continuing to try to start their cars, which is inaccurate because you know what? The electrical system's fried. Because you hear people like click, 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 click. My car won't start. No, your car's not going to do that because your wiring is fried. Because the click, click, click is the battery.
Is that the solenoid?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nothing's going to work. The battery's not, the wiring's, the battery's fine. It's just the wiring, well, at least I think the battery's fine. The wiring system has been overloaded. So there's no power to the starter to start it. So that was a little inaccurate, Yeah. And if I'm wrong, somebody tell me and I'll be okay with it.
And we'll delete your comment. That's what we'll do. That's what we do.
Well, but no, if there's no power generated through those wiring, you're not going to get anything. It's like basically having a dead battery because when your battery is completely dead, you get nothing.
Yeah, nothing should be moving inside the car.
So little tactical inaccuracy there, but and the whole zap effect. Wow, they had the zap because they were trying to show that within a small range, everything would be kind of disintegrated because it's like 4 billion degrees, within a very small range, and 8,000 degrees 2 miles out. So they're trying to show how everything just kind of disintegrates. But they're having a guy running down the highway. He was not, a mile away from this detonation. He had to be, 10 miles from it? He was far.
They made the explosion look like it was over the horizon, but I think that was just an error of perspective, But I know what you mean, where they blow up the fiance. In fact, I think it's the girl's fiance who gets spot roasted into the asphalt.
He was so far. He was so far away from that, and I'm like, no, he's not going to disintegrate. Disintegration's only going to happen in a very confined area, but scorching, burst into flames, melting. Oh, sure, that happens many miles out.
Some of that, I think and like I said, at the end, what do they say at the end of the day after? This has been toned down.
Yeah.
There's that crawl that goes by and says, "Oh, by the way, did you think this sucked? Yeah, it's probably a lot worse." And I get the feeling in some ways that, the people doing the day after slightly pulled their punches.
Yeah. So basically, like I said, it happens. Everything's disorganized. Everything is just falling apart. People don't know what to do. it's what's weird about it is all. I mean, yes, people are going to go into shock from the events that have taken place, but it seems like every almost 99.9% of the people are in shock because nobody talks, everybody's a mute, everybody shuffles around, nobody has any idea what to do at
Nobody's
all.
nobody's even asking. What
Yeah,
should I do? If they're in shock and they're desperately seeking some direction, nobody's doing that.
yeah. So I mean, and then it focuses basically on this one family and the doctor in the hospital is
Yeah.
basically how they're being overwhelmed and all the patients and the logistics and everybody's just running off the chickens and eventually you see people are leaving towns and you start getting more information. People are looking for other people. Nobody has anything. People are just wrapped in blankets. Nobody takes backpacks. Nobody does any. People. I mean, again, you're going to get a lot of that because yes, we haven't experienced a nuclear war ourselves, so we don't really know how we're going to react. But
But you're right. The one of the set dressings is everyone immediately has like their belongings wrapped in a blanket,
yeah,
as opposed to even in a. I don't remember seeing like luggage or backpacks or
no,
anything.
nothing.
Yeah.
It's like you know what, no matter how shocked I may be, I might still have the wherewithal to okay, you know what, I got backpacks and satchels and things I could put stuff into carry, make it easier for me to haul this shit around. I'm not just gonna put it in a fucking plastic grocery bag, okay? You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. It was like well, I'm in some ways it was like they went, okay, the set dresser or the costume guy said, all right, everything that anyone can have has to come from a garbage heap. You
Yeah.
know, like especially the extensive use of garbage bags in that movie. Which I mean, I get what they're trying to communicate, and but in some ways, it was it I'm not saying it was sort of like they could, in a lot of ways it felt like they condensed what we saw in Threads.
Yeah, because they did over a very short period of time. Everything like completely collapsed in such a short period of time. Eventually, you started to see a couple of deuces, deuce and a quarters here and there from the National Guard or something. You heard some kind of radio broadcast, because people were able to cobble some stuff together to
Well,
transmit with
and I would like
CVs.
I would like to point out that the president's radio broadcast, he didn't sound like he'd missed any meals from Mount Weather or
Yeah,
wherever
exactly.
he's broadcasting from. It was this marvelously empty message filled with boring platitudes
We're
that
gonna rebuild America. It's
you and what tax base, since you all of our tax base has been turned into air pollution.
yeah. So
Speaking of which, let me ask this question. What were the most effective standalone moments for you in the day after, where you went, oh, it really communicated a sense of dread and horror and, doom or fear? When were the things that worked for you in that
well,
department?
I'm gonna have to say one of the things. Well, I mean the hospital scene, everything with the hospital and how they started showing like the giant, like they're like if you're not seriously injured, you have to work if you're staying here. So a lot of people with the bodies and the giant pits and just burying everybody. The
Yeah.
impact of how the extent of the dead. But also because a lot of it seemed like it's like apparently everybody's like everything was a shanty town. Nobody sheltered in buildings anywhere. It seemed a little. You're going to get some of that, but I think some people are going to try to build in areas. But I think one of the most shocking things, not shocking, but the things that really drove it home was at the very. All right, total spoiler alert here. Of the very end, towards the very end, where the one family kind of has their shit together a little bit. The guy like comes home on his horse. He had a horse survive, and there's these people just sitting on his farm. Again, they're all mute. Everybody's a fucking mute, but they have enough sense to start a fire, cook the dead animals. They're just kind of standing there, and he's like, "Listen, he's like, you can't be here. You have to go." And he walks over with a shotgun, not noticing the very large fellow who just disappeared from the scene. Which was kind of dumb. It's like I think I would have noticed. Hey, where'd Bubba go? Okay, this very big guy just disappeared, and he just walks up right next to him and blows him in half with a fucking sawed off,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
just goes back to what he was doing.
And nobody, none of the refugees on the land blink.
No, yeah, they're just
They don't even blink murdering this guy. Yeah. And there's this implication that they're eating the dead animals on the farm, that they're essentially committing suicide.
Yeah, because they
died
from radiation.
Yeah, they're all eating radioactive meat. The only thing they've managed to do is kill the one guy who hasn't eaten radioactive meat. That's
who might be able to help you.
Yeah, or at least might even be able to survive if you left them alone. Nope, they managed to kill him.
Yeah.
All right. The thing that got me was that scene where the daughter at the Dahlberg farm. There's two things at the Dahlberg farm. One is when the missiles are up, and Mrs. Dahlberg is still going around the house straightening the corners on the bed, and the husband's like, "Okay, let's get in the basement." And she's like, I'll be down in a minute. Whatever. I've got so many things to do before our daughter gets married." And you just realize, boom, she's fucking flipped out. She has completely lost it, and her way to deal with the end of the world is to just ignore it.
Yeah.
And when he finally grabs her and she just starts screaming horribly, that was really brutally effective. And then later, when they're down,
that was a definitely it's gone McCready moment. It's like
there's no coming back from this, and she's that moment when you realize that she's just disconnected from the situation. It's like, whoops. The other one that gets me, got me.
Even the father said later, it's like, okay, to the kids, things are going to be different now. We're not going to be, things are not going to be like they were. Like, he had some grasp of what was going on.
Yeah, well, I don't think he needs to tell the kid whose eyeballs melted.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure he knows it's going to be different. But one of the things that really got me, was that thing where they're down in the basement shelter, and the daughter freaks out and starts turning the lights on and using up all the batteries because the dark's finally freaking her out, and she runs out of the basement.
Oh yeah.
Into the yard, and as she's running around, she's leaving these little puffs of dust everywhere she goes, and I'm just like, yep, that's the population of Kansas City you're running through, lady. You really probably shouldn't be stirring that up. And she's like, runs by some branches, and then all the branches have dust on it, and they go poof into the air, and Gutenberg's trying to chase her down and get her, and all the dust gets on him as he runs through it, and watching him just run around the fallout where she's like, "It's a beautiful day! Look, the sun is out!" And she keeps doing this face where she does this horrible rictus smile with her eyeballs bugging out, where she's like, and I'm just like, oh my God, Steve, go back in the basement, tell Mom and Pa Kettle you couldn't find her, okay? Because there's just, as far as the eye can see, there's dead cows, dead birds, ash all over everything, and she's completely bugged out, and he is desperately trying to get her to come inside. And at that point, I'm like, he's had to tackle her, and they're rolling around in the talcum powder that used to be the population of downtown Kansas City, and it's just like, oh God, no, it's too late. You fucked up. It's
and they definitely show a lot of like how apparently everybody except for some people, but they're really trying to show the effects of the radiation sickness and how people start losing it, and everybody's gotten sores and their hair's a lot. They really do a lot of that, a lot of makeup in this show. Yeah,
Steve Gutenberg and what's his name, and Jason Robards are not looking particularly hirsute by the end of the program. They're looking a little Telly Savalas.
Well, no, Jason Robards looking kind of like how John Cusack did in Fat Man and Little Boy when he got exposed to all that radiation.
Yeah.
Because that's the kind of exposure that he had. And so, I mean, so you get a lot of that, and then I thought, again, the whole disorganization, like I said, you occasionally saw the government you saw one truck come and start to give food. And
I think that's the only thing I remember seeing that was even remotely like that there's anything left upstairs. And a radio broadcast.
And you had the local guys, like the three guys on the panel trying to talk about how well, this is what we need to do, and you need to plow deep, and you need to get rid of the topsoil. And he's like, were you reading that from a manual? It's like, well, yeah, that's what we get. And he's like, what are we gonna do with 150 acres of radioactive topsoil?
Yeah, yeah. Stack it up someplace so that when the winds come, it'll blow it all back into your field. That's a good idea.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, yeah, you got to get rid of the topsoil, which I've read in manuals, but it's like, you know what, when you have a giant farm, yeah, it's just not going to work. So
Yeah, the interesting thing about that is that the Americans look completely unprepared, and there is nothing like a government there. Everybody is completely on their own after the bomb, and what's interesting is again maybe because all the government is gone, but it's the exact opposite in Threads in the war game where the government is there, and it's just not doing any good.
it's ineffective. So let's move off from the day after, and we'll move on to the English answer to that, Threads.
I want to say a couple of words about the movie The War Game. The War Game precedes Threads by 20 years. It was made in 1965 by a guy named Peter Watkins, and it's only like 48 minutes long, and it's done like a documentary style thing. And their World War III happens when the Chinese invade South Vietnam to support the Viet Cong, sort of a Korean War II electric boogaloo, and we use nukes to stop them from taking over South Vietnam, and that triggers a Berlin crisis, and then a conflict in Western Europe with NATO, and then blammo, you got something that looks a lot like what would happen during the Cuban Missile Crisis. I want to point out that they mentioned something like 68 targets in Britain that would be taking a 1 megaton hit each, which is about a quarter of the damage that is predicted in Threads. You know? Stop them from taking over South Vietnam, and that triggers a. Are you hearing me still speaking?
Yes. So.
All right, sorry.
That is also. I actually have that also favorited on the YouTube channel. So if anybody wants to find that, just go to the podcast channel, go to favorites, and that's the War Games there as well. So
the things I want to point about the War Games is that during that movie, you see the British evacuating millions of people from high-density areas in the country. You see them going door to door to hand out manuals. You see them going door to door with Bobby saying, "All right, you're going to house these people," and the British citizens going, "No, there aren't any black people in there, are there? We won't have any blacks in here," and they're being forced to house people that they don't want to in less targeted areas like Wales and Scotland, and it shows food riots, the murder of British police officers trying to police the country, and one of the last things you see in the film is firing squads, where British constables are lining up to execute people who have rioted and looted food storage areas. But the thing about the War Game is that it really has a lot of the elements that you're going to see later in Threads. It's got a narrator. It's got interjections of sort of other information into the story. There isn't a consistent family that they follow like they do in Threads. But the War Game was actually banned. It was not officially banned, but the BBC showed it to the Home Office and showed it to the Prime Minister's office before they broadcast it, and then suddenly it disappeared. It wasn't going to be broadcast on television. It ended up in movie theaters, I think, which was a tough sell because it's not a full movie. It's only 48 minutes long, but it got some. It really never showed up on television until I think either after Threads or just barely before.
Yeah, I don't recall that. But with Threads now, well, the Threads is kind of like dry British drama TV show with interjections of documentary in between. So it's not like it's like a full-on documentary. It's like you're watching a show, then boom, all of a sudden they'll come in with facts and figures and talk about things. Then back to the TV show, and then interject with the documentary things. Now,
and mind you say dry,
Well, it's kind of dry.
it is as dry as a guy wandering around Auschwitz with a 16 millimeter camera. Just,
Yeah,
it's
very.
all horrifying. Everything that's in front of the camera is horrifying. But unlike the day after, there's no soundtrack.
Nope. Well, also something else. Again, I always like to throw this in because you don't see these in these films. Now, the day after, we didn't really see a whole lot of this, but I figured you would have seen a whole lot more of this.
You see them going door to door to hand out manuals. You see them going door to door.
We have a. Oh, hold on a second. Oh, well, hold on. What the?
Is that the YouTube channel playing in the background?
Hold on.
And they're being forced to house
What?
that don't want to.
Hold on a second.
Less targeted. It's Ghost Scott. And it showed.
Okay.
It got louder for a second.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It was playing in the background like one of the channels. All right, anyway, so the thing you see about the day after is America is an armed population. Okay? They never really seem to take that kind of stuff into account because you know what? I think you see a couple people here and there, but I really think there'd be a lot more people with a lot more guns killing a lot more people.
Yeah, over the scraps.
Over the scraps. I think
over the shelter.
I think that is a reality that really would happen because guns are so accessible. It's like, you know what, everything went to shit. I bet you I could just start rummaging through my neighbor's houses in my neighborhood. I guarantee I'm going to find a whole lot of guns. Okay, maybe not armloads, but I'll find guns. They're easily accessible here. You're gonna find them. So they don't really have to really show that, and it does not come into effect in Britain because again, it's not an armed population. So the story is kind of different because you don't really have that because the people only really have guns, except for rural people who are hunters, in the military, and the police. That's it. So it kind of has a different landscape. Whereas, in America, it's gonna be the Wild West, I think, all over again.
Well, and I want to throw out in the movie The War Game, one of the things that they show is some trucks carrying weapons being, grabbed by rioters who are starving. And, at first they're shooting tear gas and clubbing down the people who want their food. And then, suddenly these armed insurrectionists, or whatever, as they're characterized in the anti-authoritarian forces, grab a bunch of British military rifles, and they're running them up, gunning down constables and shooting soldiers and the whole 9 yards. And one other thing that I gotta throw out that's in the war.
Get that out, and then we're not talking about the war game anymore because we weren't going to cover that, and we don't have a lot of time left, and we got to talk about Threads.
The one thing I want to throw out that was that they do not have in Threads, which struck me because they have everything else in Threads. There's a bit in the war game where they hand out revolvers so that they can shoot the dying patients who cannot be cared for, where they're just going around doing these mass executions of the wounded, which results in people refusing to obey the orders and then getting shot by their commanding officers and horrible shit like that. But that's maybe the one thing that was left out of the frickin' Threads.
But Threads had everything else. Threads centers on Sheffield, England. Long buildup of the conflict. Like it's the conflicts. They start talking about the conflict like in March 5th is where they start. There's a little bit of a buildup of a conflict going on, and then it jumps to 3 months. They do a lot of time jumping in this. Like they'll jump ahead, 3 months, and then they start doing like day 1, day 2, day 11, then 5 years. But it starts off the conflict starting. It jumps ahead 2 months to May, and over those 2 months, the conflicts have started to build. It's getting worse, and that's when they start doing, like we were talking about earlier. Britain starts preparing its population. They start, pamphlets. They start showing people on TV what to do, and they also start their infrastructure that they have for in case of some disaster. They have like the war book, they called it. Like they.
It's sort of like a British version of FEMA, where everybody starts taking on these or assign these emergency
roles.
Yeah.
And they start breaking it up to where there is each section, each city has their own little. They're given the authority to govern the local area. So they start preparing them. Hey, they get a phone call. all right, start preparing your team, get the people in there, start setting up your war room. This is where you're going to need to control everything from. So and again, like you said, they are prepared for this. They are preparing for this. They're trying to get infrastructure in place. They're like, okay, well, how much food supplies do we have here? Okay, let's kind of isolate that. Okay, start using, the gas. Start saving the gas. Okay, only, non-essential things are gone. So they're like building up on this, trying to prepare and stockpile and get everything ready before it happens. So
Yeah.
they do have some kind of preparation, but as we go through it, it just doesn't
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. Their preparation is tossing bricks into the Grand Canyon, and the scale of a problem is so huge that their preparation doesn't amount to much.
Yeah. So as they're going through this, the documentary stuff interjects with, they start talking about how many, how many missiles were launched, how many times Britain's hit, and it focused. There was a couple of families, like there's two main families.
There's two main families that they follow. The families of the boy and girl who are engaged to be married.
And because she got pregnant. So, and also that comes into play later on, and it follows them and how everything just kind of deteriorates with that.
And you also follow the people in the command center for a while.
Yeah, you follow the command center as well. Those are the three main focuses of what's being followed. The bombs hit.
It's a nice Iranian crisis.
It is, yes.
As I'm watching their World War III, where the Soviets invade Iran because Iran is supporting the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, they're trying to squash Islamic fundamentalism. Suddenly, we're in there too, the Rapid Deployment Force, and it starts scaling up. It's not 2 hours to doomsday; it's a week to doomsday.
Oh, well, they said, the United States got involved and set an agenda date. Okay, here's your deadline. If something doesn't happen, then we're going to do X. Deadline makes it. They send a fleet of B-52 bombers there, non-nuclear weapons, and start attacking the Soviet base. They launch nuclear-tipped anti-aircraft. We lose a lot of bombers, and we respond by dropping a field tactical nuke on their base. And everything stops temporarily.
And I thought that was really interesting that it didn't just continue to spiral up. We have this expectation that if we stop,
it's going to continue. House of Cards,
yeah, that it'll all be incredibly. It'll be like dominoes. That once you fire that first nuclear weapon, it is minutes before the last one's out of its silo. But it's days because they sit down and they talk about it. And it looks like they're maybe going to get out of this, and then no.
No, that's when after that they just said, okay, you know what, fuck y'all, and they just start launching, But
but for a little while there, they give this weird little hope, like everyone's gonna talk their way out of this. We're not really gonna do this, and then we're not gonna commit, global suicide. Nope.
But while they're doing it, everybody's still preparing, and that's when all the stuff with the command base and the people are trying to prepare themselves for what's going on. So then the missiles come, again over Sheffield. There's they
hit Sheffield. Sheffield takes a hit, and the RAF
because there's a base near there. There's a base, and it takes a hit, and they do a tactical a nuke for EMP, somewhere over the Channel, so it hits part of France, part of England, and they actually show after the EMP when they try to start the cars, nothing happens. So which I found an interesting difference. So the nukes come. And I think they hit them more like the first round. I think they were only hit by
80 megatons.
80 megatons, but then they throw more later, and it winds up being a total of 210. They just keep on throwing more at them, but that's when everything starts. It gets the bomb hits, destruction, stock footage, but they show a lot of fucking just
horrible
graphic,
shit.
Horrible shit.
It's all very close up. You don't see whole cities disappearing under a mushroom cloud. You see a bedroom exploding around some people.
Yeah.
You see people on fire in the rubble, one-on-one. You don't see huge crowds of people being affected. It's all claustrophobic.
There's no zap effect.
No zap. There's some motherfuckers on fire.
Oh, there's a lot of people on fire. There's this one scene which I forgot about. You see a lot of shit on fire after they drop the first bomb. It pans by a building and there's a tree on fire, and in the tree, there's a guy on his bicycle in the tree on fire.
Yeah, that was particularly fucking horrible. The ones that got me, the things that got me was like when the balloon goes up and everyone's running around. That woman who just looks up at the sky and pisses herself.
I think that was the most. That was, again, without having the big a budget and they had to make an impact of what was going on. I think that was very. It's this middle-aged woman who everything starts going down. And people are trying to get into shelters, and she's just standing there, holding her face, looking at the mushroom cloud come up, and it just pans down to her leg, and the water's flowing. She just pisses herself because she's so terrified.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Welcome to the club. Welcome to the club.
Oh.
The other thing I was going to throw out was that I thought was particularly interesting in the way and creeped me out was the cat with the broken back or whatever flopping around in the burning rubble.
Yeah.
Where I don't know how I mean, I'm presuming they didn't murder a cat to do this scene, but they like tied the cat's legs up in a way so it's all, and I'm just like, this animal dying in the rubble is just like.
Oh, they showed you a lot of like dogs and cats and people, like when the daughter eventually, after like a couple of days, and the grandmother dies, she starts wandering around because she's like 3 months she's like over 2 months pregnant at this point, and she's just wandering around, and you're just seeing just charred bodies everywhere.
Yeah, they do a lot of people burning like candle wax, where the body fat has been, is up to a temperature where they're just burning like tallow, and you just didn't get that in the day after. You just didn't.
No, and there was this one thing I noticed right afterwards. There's like the fires were burning. That was another thing too. No fire, like all like emergency services, like fire engines, they sent out of the city to later fight fires later, and they decided they can't do anything, which they would not be able to do anything.
Yeah.
You see all the fires burning, and there's a lot of wind afterwards too. Still, for some reason, after the blast, there's this one scene where
the wind is a firestorm. That's the air being sucked into the fire, which they explained in the war game. That the fire is actually pulling
all the air,
almost hurricane force winds into the fire to feed it.
Yeah, they don't explain that at all. But you see some rubble, and there's like you can see this part of the body, and you just see blood just kind of being blown out of the rocks. Just this blood just splattering out.
The other one that I would think to point out is the compare and contrast is the hospital scene in Threads compared to the hospital scene in the day after. Yeah, there's more people and it's a bigger scene in the day after, but in the hospital in Threads, yeah, they're sawing limbs off and there's blood running down the stairs in the hospital that's just pouring out of the wards. There's just rivers of blood that people are stepping on and walking
things
through.
Things are dry. People are screaming and yelling, and they're just cutting people's limbs off, and people are just wandering everywhere. It is just, and that's when, again, documentary starts kicking in. It's like, well, without electricity and out the power and the medicines, you're not going to get any more comfort from a doctor than your fellow survivors. And I don't think that's I don't think that's totally true. I think a doctor would still be able to try to do something,
Yeah, well, they're not going to be able to. They're going to be able to set a limb. They're going to be able to stitch a artery closed. And there's that scene where they're pulling glass out of people's faces.
Yeah,
everybody's got these facial scars in Threads because everybody caught a window from the concussion.
Oh, like the one family's mother, she was standing right outside. The window blew in, and the fire came in, and she was just fucked up.
Third-degree burns.
Everywhere. And they're like sitting under a couple of doors with some mattresses and shit. They're kind of hiding under there. And she's just like, I was like, oh, she's gone.
She's screaming and throwing up into her burns.
Oh, yeah.
They're stuck back there behind that worthless shelter, vomiting on themselves, vomiting in their little crawl space. And it's just nightmarish. I'm willing to say that Threads is so is disturbing on the level of like a genuine horror movie.
Yeah, they really try to show you. They don't pull at punches. They're like, you know what? This shit's bad. This is what you're gonna see.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I'm a very bad person for this, but when I first saw this back in in 19 yeah, thank you. Back in 1985, when they go to look for their son who was hiding in the bird cage. They come crawling out of the rubble, and they find their son, but all you see is like his little legs kind of sticking straight up out of the rubble.
Yeah.
And the 15, 16-year-old me thought that was funny, like because it wasn't like a burn victim who was crushed. It was just like, oh, look at my legs sticking up. That was it.
It looked a little bit like the Wicked Witch of the West sticking out
Yes,
from underneath Dorothy's house.
that was poorly done. It's like it would have been more impactful. But they showed things where like rubble and bloody hands, and I mean they really did a horrific job of showing the horror. I mean they really did it up. So all this bad shit happens. The continuity of government is not really there. Like they're like the
It's more there. It's more there than it is.
Oh yeah. Well, they're trying.
The day after.
But the guys at the command headquarters are buried under rubble in the basement of the city hall. They keep on talking about, how are you gonna get us out of here? When are you gonna get us dug out of here? Because they get some kind of communication with some local police departments, and they're trying to control things from there without while they're underground. And the movie starts showing, day 1, day 2, day 4, a week, 11 days after, 2 weeks after, a month. They start progressing, but like up to like 2 weeks later, they're like warehouses. The military is basically in charge, or the police are in charge because they got all the gear, they got the food, they got the weapons.
I have to show the one picture from Threads that always sort of sums up the sort of what's the continuity of government look like in Threads? And let's see if I hit screen share. Oh, no, maybe it's not working. But there's a cover from a British news magazine that shows. Bobby. Yeah, well, no, it's not even a Bobby. It's a fucking traffic warden, which means it's a meter maid, and he's got this bandaged head because he's horribly mutilated from catching a faceload of glass. And he's got, a fucking Lee Enfield battle rifle, and now has the authority to shoot to kill. That's who's now who's now dealing out lethal force for Her Majesty's government is meter maids, armed meter maids. That's where we're at, ladies and gentlemen. That's how fucked it is. Last week you were writing tickets for being double parked. Now you're shooting looters. Yeah.
Exactly. So they just show the horrors of everything, and they start talking about getting to the point where they're rationing food, how many calories for people who could work, how many calories for people who don't work, and like you said, Jane had said, Britain gets very dusty.
Dirty, and dark. I mean, part of it's England's darker than Kansas, but there's this sort of feeling like the whole country is under a cloud.
Well, that's what they said, because 500 million tons of dust went up into the stratosphere and is blocking out the sun. So it got dark.
And remember, in Threads, do that shit where they hold the food supplies for 2 weeks to make sure that everyone who's been lethally dosed doesn't get a mouthful of food.
Yep.
So that anyone who's going to die from radiation gets the dying done with, so they don't eat any food that the other people might be able to use.
Oh yeah, because they're even talking about, it's like we shouldn't even be feeding those people because they're going to die anyway.
Yeah.
They're very, very cold and calculating with their methods, but they're trying to think the long term for survival, of the people. So they put people to work. They start, getting the crops pulled, and they talk about how this is probably the last year there'll ever be gas-driven tractors. And they get into all the minutia of that, when the food and the first winter comes, and and
the first winter just wipes out everyone who's been sick or malnourished,
old, the young, and it really thins out. And they talk about how much of the population. So they really get, again, it starts to get a little more documentary-ish. The one woman who was pregnant has her child. And they talk about how,
and she has it by herself. And what she do about the umbilical cord, Jared?
Cuts it with her teeth.
Oh my God, she has to chew through her umbilical cord. Oh my God.
Well, man, that's also another thing that Threads did as well is everybody's carrying around whatever stuff they have in plastic bags or wrapped in blankets. It's like, dude, I know you're a little bit shell shocked, but you're gonna get over it. Get a backpack, get a sack, get a suitcase,
Yeah.
something a little more efficient. I would think. I can't see a year into this, I'm still carrying on whatever I have in a plastic bag. It's just
Yeah,
not
I remember there's a scene where some refugees are leaving Sheffield and going out to the countryside, and
bicycles and
I remember some bicycles. I remember some maybe some little red wagons or a wheelbarrow or something. But
still a lot of plastic bags.
yeah, a lot of it down to that. I apparently I guess again the Soviets must have targeted all the luggage stores.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the key. That's the key to winning this war.
Yeah. Yeah. Take that, Gucci. But anyways, take that, Samsonite.
Eliminate the population's ability to carry their stuff around, and you've won the war.
Yeah. Yeah. There you go.
So they get into all that, and they follow the character. She has her baby, and they say that early doses of radiation exposure can cause deformity and retardation in unborn children. So they make a point of saying that, and it seems like maybe her child was, because after the child is born and they show a little bit of their struggling, it jumps ahead like 10 years.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
they jump ahead to show because they talk about how England got medieval with their agriculture, and there's still people, they're like hanging people for looting, they're shooting people for looting, they're redistributing the population to intact houses.
Yeah. The guys who go in the basement apparently murder her mom and dad, who weren't doing too terrible, since they weren't covered with burns and weren't filled with radioactive shrapnel. They get murdered by some looters. Those guys don't even get out of the house before some soldiers show up, shoot their asses, and then take the food they stole, which I thought was a nice touch. They're like, oh, bonus, cans of food,
Well, no, they're not just going to leave it there. So
no, that's ridiculous.
So they continue through that, through what's going on, and somebody did make a point. I've read somewhere this. They said that within a generation, everything, England becomes medieval, and it kind of would. It's because you're gonna go far back if you don't have electricity, power, transportation, and how language disappears almost, which I think is a valid point. Okay, the one girl they've implied may have had some kind of mental disorder, but
she can't talk. Yeah, she can barely speak.
But the other young kids, I'm sorry, just because you don't have any schools or written language doesn't mean they can't talk. Because how many remote villages and whether it's Africa or Australia, places where they have quote unquote primitives, they don't have schools, they don't have written language, but people could fucking talk because it's just they learn from other people. You learn just from hearing it, and people could talk.
Well, you're right. They have this sort of the kids. They have this sort of pidgin English that they're using, and I guess by the time
it's like not even close, and it's like they could barely talk.
And I could get that if they were born completely before the problem, but the idea that these kids are 16, which means they were 6 or 7 when this happened, and they're down to not able to say "gimme" or "give it to me," or and I'm like, they're a little quick on the draw with that, in my humble opinion. I mean, I understood with the girl who's retarded. Maybe they're also implying that these other kids are feral as well, but they just didn't seem. They didn't establish that they were also born after the attack.
Yeah,
they were the result of.
But still, but being around people, I think you would still pick up on language and at least have some kind of rudimentary. You might not be able to, wax poetically, but you can have the basic communication skills.
Even Barney, the retarded guy from Survivors, could talk. Remember Barney?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's retarded, but again, granted, he was around people all the time before the disease came, so he'd been, I guess, acclimated or civilized or, domesticated. But that kind of was weird. You know what else is a weird touch about that part? When they're looting the farmhouse, there's a fucking helicopter flying overhead
Yes.
yelling at him with a
And
loudspeaker.
this is 10 years later.
And so I'm like, what the hell's going on here? And even in the hospital, at the end of the thing, in the schoolroom, there's a videotape,
There's
and
some power.
there's lights on in the hospital. The hospital actually has lights.
Well, they did allude to steam power coming around at like 10 or 13
Yeah.
years. They showed people mining, and they had like a steam tractor. So maybe they were able to like make up some kind of steam generators to generate power or something. I'll give
So
them the benefit of the doubt.
so there
On
is
that.
some sort of society. It's some sort of dictatorship, some sort of non-participatory military dictatorship
Oh
that
yeah, because
is
they're still shooting people. They're still hanging people for
yeah
anything.
yeah for being a retarded kid on your own in the rubble. So there's definitely that going on. There's definitely some sort of force at work in England, but when you get to the last scene of Threads, and we're 2 generations in, and she gets pregnant and has that baby in the hospital, and it's just this stillborn meat log at the end, and your last scene is her sucking in a giant double lung full of air so she can scream in horror when they hand her floppy dead mutant baby, at the end. The problem is not that there's some sort of that we're not farming. The problem is not that there isn't lights. The problem is not that there isn't some kind of order. The problem is that we're all loaded up with so much radiation. We're not breeding.
Yes.
That,
And
that,
yeah, exactly. The radiation or poor health. They talk about how typhoid, cholera, all these things are going to wipe people out. How it's all going to come back. There's no sanitation. There's no electricity. There's no water. And one thing that did bother me about it, though, even 10 years later, when they show Ruth, who was the woman who had the child, I can't remember the child's name. They're living in some kind of house on a farm. Apparently, nobody has any sense of organization.
Well, yeah. It's 10 years later.
Everything is still fucking in shambles. It's like, this is the shack I have to live in. Maybe I might get the rubble out of in the interior, or maybe it's some walls.
It's piles of broken bricks. It's timbers laying around. There's been no effort by anyone to police up anything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to police up a city is too overwhelming. You don't have the population, but areas at least where people are living in. Okay, this is my shack. Okay, you know what? Let me get some of the broken rubble out of here. Let me make it so I can at least move around, and hey, maybe I'll put some stuff up here to keep some of the wind and cold out.
Perhaps we'll take some of those plastic bags we've been carrying around and put them over the holes in the walls.
Yeah.
There's everything stays as just as exploded as it was 10 years earlier, even though that they've already to the part where they've moved way out into the countryside.
Yeah.
There's been no effort whatsoever to
anything. At least where you're living. Hey, even medieval peasants living on the Lord's land at least had 4 walls and a roof over their head. That were enclosed.
Yeah, they went and they got some thatch. They went and they got some mud, and they made some mud bricks, or they made stuff out of dried peat, like the sod huts that we had in the American plains. But it's like everyone's still shuffling around in a state of shell shock 10 years later, and there's been no movement to just go, well, there's a giant shard of glass through the bed. I'll just lie down around the shard and hope I don't accidentally
kill myself.
Disembowel myself. There's nobody's gone, I guess I better pull that out of here and throw it outside. No, nothing like that has happened 10 years later.
Yeah, so that's a bit unrealistic. But overall, it's a very good film. It definitely shows you the whole, they do a better job of showing the horrors of, the actual destruction and what's going to happen to people, things like that. And again, seems like
it's probably the best. It's probably the best out of any of them.
And it seems like a larger extension for that other film that I talked about, the A Guide to Armageddon, which was done by the same exact guy. So it seems like a larger expansion of trying to show the effects of, nuclear war and horror. And just to add on to Threads, and then we're going to wrap it up here because we're
Okay.
way past an hour. After Threads originally aired in America on TBS in 1985, it was followed by a program called On the Eighth Day, where they do this in-depth study and look at nuclear winter, the nuclear winter scenarios. Carl Sagan, other scientists, they do a lot of research, volcanoes and stratospheres and computer models, weather computer models back in the 80s. So it was pretty interesting. Again, I put out a call to try to find that, and again, Bill from postapocalyptic.net tracked it down for me. Not that I didn't, I knew it existed out there, but it was never existed in a format that I could get my hands on. Like, I had found a website that showed a listing of university libraries, like 6 or 7 in the country, that had them supposedly in their libraries. The closest one was 600 miles from me. There's no way I was ever going to be able to. Yeah, there's no way I was going to be able to. Hey, do you have this in your library? So, but I never found it anywhere. But apparently, when Bill got on mission to find this, he's in Hawaii, and a university in Hawaii near where he lives had a copy, and he had a friend who worked at the university checked it out for him. So he wound up ripping it and posting it onto YouTube, so I was able to watch this again. And it's also favorited on the YouTube channel. It's called On the Eighth Day. I really enjoyed it. I liked it. I mean, he said it was a bit, he would never watch it again. It's a documentary on nuclear winter. Unless you really like that kind of geeky, minutia scientific details of why things happen, you might get one view out of it. But I liked it enough to where I was like, oh, I want to know why this happens, and why is there nuclear winter, and what's going to happen. So it's out there, and that was the companion piece that came after Threads in America.
Hey Jared, were there any? Do you remember that they were like after they aired the day after, there were like these programs that came on afterwards, or other channels ran things that were like, discussing the day after. I remember like panels on news shows that there was even debate whether or not children should be allowed to watch the day after.
Yeah, I believe so. I kind of recall that. I even remember people saying, it's like, oh, I saw the day after when I was a kid and we watched it in school and I was traumatized by it. I'm like, it wasn't that horrific, dude.
Thank God we didn't show them Threads. That's because
they thought they were traumatized by the day after. Let's see all the burning bodies and the blood blowing in the wind,
and the rats. Don't forget that the day after just has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fat, well-fed rats, all scurrying through the rubble.
Because they got a lot to eat. They're not going hungry.
Not for a while, not until they swell up with giant tumors.
Yeah.
from the radiation.
Oh, and that was the other thing in the day after where it happens, and they're in the hospital, and there's a doctor and the nurse, and they see a cockroach crawling, and he's like, that's the ultimate survivor. That's what's going to survive a nuclear war. That whole cliche of how cockroaches will survive anything. Again, the whole thing was like that the day after.
What's funny to me about the cockroach thing is that
apparently it's not true.
Yeah, it's been put forward that the reason cockroaches are doing just fine up here in, say, the Pacific Northwest or Vancouver or Yellowknife or Anchorage is that we've imported all this environment, these houses, that is filled with temperatures that they enjoy. And that if, we didn't have heated interior buildings, if, all that came to an end, there'd be a giant cockroach die-off north of the Mason-Dixon line. Yep. And they would do very poorly because they've adapted to live around us.
Yep.
In our urban environments. And if our urban environments stop being an artificial environment, giant cockroach apocalypse, where the later generations of cockroaches will think back to the furnace builders. Oh, the furnace builders, the bringers of the holy insulation,
Maybe you should write a post-apocalyptic story from the cockroach's point of view, Scott. Okay.
Clearly, there is some story, and I don't remember who wrote it. It's a time travel story where they go into the future, and the guy shows up in the future. He can only be in the future for like 20 seconds, and he looks around. He grabs like an idol. He's like in a temple. He doesn't change position, but he changes millions of years in the future. There's a building. There's fires. There's torches. He grabs the idol off the table. He zooms back to the present, and what he's got is a statue of a god or goddess or something, but it's a fucking cockroach. It's some anthropomorphized cockroach, like Zeus or Apollo. It's their version of Zeus or Apollo because, yeah, we blew it, and it's their turn now. So maybe that's all we need to say on the cockroach apocalypse. But all right, anyways.
All right, so that's it, folks. Again, 2 movies worth checking out. I think they may. They're definitely. I know they're on YouTube because I know that's where you watched them, right, Scott? They're on YouTube.
No. I own a copy of The Day After.
Okay.
And I haven't gotten around to watching. I haven't gotten around to buying Threads yet, but I rented it from Scarecrow Video, where I also got The War Game, which is on YouTube Video.
On YouTube.
Yeah.
So it's you find on YouTube. I think The Day After.
I think Threads is on there in multi parts.
Yeah. Day After is probably a Netflix, Amazon Prime type of thing, or you could buy it. I think I got it cheap. I think I got it on Amazon used for like a couple bucks or something.
Yeah, that's exactly the edition I got. It was like $3.
Yeah, it was one of those things where it's like, well, I could try to find to rent it, or for the price of a rental, I could just buy the damn thing. So I bought the damn thing. So
exactly.
So there you go, folks.
We're completists. We must have all the nuclear holocaust.
Yes, exactly. So anyway, folks, so that's it. They're worth checking out. Like I said, the 3 things that we mentioned on the show also are on the favorites on our YouTube channel. It's the War Day, A Guide to Armageddon, and On the Eighth Day are all on YouTube, and they're all on our favorites channel on the podcast at Ground Zero.
Hey, Mr. Wallace.
Yes.
Next time, we're going to talk about things like Special Bulletin. Remember Special Bulletin from the 80s, where the terrorists blow up a nuclear bomb in Charleston, South Carolina?
Not aware of that.
Oh yeah, there were 2 competing day afters. One was Special Bulletin, which was like disguised as a news program, like covering the crisis of the nuclear terrorism in Charleston, South Carolina, and the other one was this cheesy World War III movie with I don't know, with what's his name from Starsky and Hutch fighting Russians in Alaska. Do you remember that?
No. All right. Well, regardless, we'll talk about this offline. So we'll figure out what we're gonna do next time. So I don't know what we're gonna do next time, folks, as usual. But we'll definitely decide.
He never knows.
I never know. Well, I'll decide. We'll talk about it offline. We'll figure what we're going to talk about, folks. But it makes it a surprise to you to find out what we're going to be talking about. So, anyway, folks, surprise! So, check those out. Thanks again for being with us, and we will see you in 2 weeks for the next show. Thank you, folks.
In a fortnight, since we're doing English apocalypses, we should say in a fortnight.
In a fortnight, we will see you then. All right, folks, good night. Thank you, and see you in the wastelands. Bye-bye.
Cheerio.